um, I've mentioned before that becoming a Buddhist in a formal kind of sense, the way it's recognized in the tradition, involves making um, moral vows, right? It's not like in some other religious traditions where it's about, believing the right things, making a confession of faith, this sort of stuff. It's about um, making vows primarily to yourself to try to live according to a certain moral code. So the purpose of talking about that tonight is to kind of begin the process for anyone who wants to pursue that, right? Who's interested in potentially moving toward taking the precepts um, with Heido from Mariwadu Zen Center. We actually just had a board meeting for Mariwadu Zen Temple last weekend, and he and I talked about it a little bit. And I was just on the phone; I wasn't there. And um, he said, actually, it's not looking like there's going to be anybody here who's going to be in a position to take the precepts in the spring. So there probably isn't going to be a precept ceremony in the spring here, but I want to come down there and do it there. So he and probably one of the other clergy in the spring are intending to actually come down here and presumably right here. We'll do a precept ceremony for anybody who wants to do that. So let me kind of get a little background first, and some of this might be things that you already know about. Um, if you look at the Buddha Dharma, there is kind of three main elements to the path. Uh, the Trishiksa, right? The three core elements. Um, Shila, morality, living a good life according to the moral teachings of the Buddha Dharma. Samadhi, meditative concentration, training the mind, sharpening the ability to control the mind. And then prajna, wisdom, um, properly understanding what life is really about, right? Life as it really is. Um, Now, according to the Buddha, the first and foundational area of training is in morality, right? And living life in a way that's fair and kind and beneficent to all beings in the world and all those sorts of things. Leading a moral life supports the development of a mind that's skilled in concentration, which in turn encourages the growth of wisdom, seeing life as it really is. So those three areas, they're separate, but they're kind of mutually interdependent with one another, and they influence one another. The three together capture the full richness of the Buddha's teachings. Um, the reason morality matters so much is that morality kind of being the foundation for the other two is that if you think about samadhi, if you think about that middle skill, mental skill, that concentration, the sharp mind, um, that's a tool that could be used for lots of purposes, right? And if it doesn't have proper moral guidance, it could be used in harmful ways as easily it could be used in beneficial ways. It could be used in ways that are in the service of greed, anger, and ignorance, right? So morality serves as a foundation to help direct that mental acuity that comes from the development of samadhi. So that's important. So this is the reason why morality is really the beginning of things. And if you look at the stories of the Buddha, um, in particular, if you've heard of the what are called the Jataka tales. The Jataka tales are these stories that were developed telling these very fanciful stories about the previous lives of the Buddha, right? And when he was a king, or he was an elephant, or he was this, that, or the some kind of animal, or various different kinds of people. And almost all of those they're kind of Aesop's fable kind of stories. They're morality tales, right? And they're stories that talk about the development of justice and fairness and compassion and benevolence and all those sorts of things. So the Buddha, if those were his previous lives, was born kind of with that foundation and morality already built in. So this is the reason why we start with morality. So what does the Buddha Dharma actually teach about morality? The simplest statement of Shila, of morality, is in the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is this. I've got a couple of different translations of the Dhammapada up there. It's this short little text. It's a kind of a collection of sayings attributed to the Buddha on various different sorts of themes. You could read the whole thing in just an hour or so. And the core moral teaching is in verse 183 of the Dhammapada. I've got the Pali here, but I'll just do the English because it's really simple. Doing no evil, undertaking the good, purifying one's mind, this is the teaching of the Buddha. That's it. And that's the foundation. Don't do evil, do good, purify your mind, right? So that's kind of where everything starts. So then everything else about morality in Buddhism is kind of unpacking that, right? What does it mean to not do evil? What does it mean to, what constitutes doing good? How do we go about purifying the mind, right? So everything else is unpacking that idea. So what does it mean to not do evil from a Buddhist point of view? So if we want to go a little deeper, the next kind of layer of information about morality, we can find, again, in kind of the oldest scriptures, in the Pali scriptures, we can find in the Anguttara, which is one of the big thick books up there on the top, one of the collections of texts in the Pali tradition, the Abhisanda Sutta. So I'm going to read you just a little piece of the Abhisanda Sutta here. There are bhikkhus these 5 gifts, great gifts, primal, of long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, and never before adulterated, which are not being adulterated and which will not be adulterated, not repudiated by wise ascetics and Brahmins. Which 5? Here a noble disciple, having abandoned the destruction of life, abstains from the destruction of life. By abstaining from the destruction of life, the noble disciple gives to an immeasurable number of beings freedom from fear, enmity, and affliction. He himself, in turn, enjoys immeasurable freedom from fear, enmity, and affliction. This is the first gift, a great gift, primal, of long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, and never to be adulterated, which is not being adulterated, which will not be adulterated, not repudiated by wise ascetics and Brahmins. Again, a noble disciple, having abandoned the taking what is not given, abstains from taking what is not given, abstains from sexual misconduct, abstains from false speech, abstains from liquor, wine, and intoxicants, the basis for heedlessness. Right? So that passage gives us what's called the Panka Shila, the 5 moral precepts. Panka means 5, Shila means morality. So the 5 moral teachings, right? So I just went through them, but let's look at them again, right? Not taking life. The first one is to not kill, not to command others to kill. Not stealing, right? So the second one is don't take things that aren't given to you. Don't take things that aren't yours to take. The third one is not committing sexual misconduct, right? So don't use the energy of sexuality in a way that's harmful to other beings. The fourth one is not lying, right? Don't say things that aren't true, or in a broader sense, to engage in harmful speech, right? Don't engage in harmful speech. And then finally, the fifth one, not intoxicating the mind. Don't use alcohol or drugs to create a heedless state, which makes violating the other precepts more likely. That's the fifth one is weird. The fifth one's a little different from the others, right? Because the first 4 involve, in some direct way, hurting someone else, right? Obviously, if you kill something, you're killing it. If you take something that's not yours, you're taking something away from someone else. If you are engaged in sexual misconduct, you're harming someone else through your conduct. If you're lying or deceitful or harmful in your speech, you're hurting someone else. The fifth one, you're not directly hurting someone else, but you're creating a state in which it's more likely that you will kill or steal or engage in sexual misconduct, or use speech in an unhealthy way. So the fifth one is a little unique in that sense. It in and of itself is not harmful, but it creates a mental state in which you're more likely to engage in behavior that you'll violate some other of the precepts. Those 5 things are also the first 5 of the 10 major bodhisattva precepts that are given in a text called the Brahmanet Sutra. That's one of the Mahayana sutras. The fifth one's a little different in that list. Actually, in the list of the 10 bodhisattva vows, the fifth precept is to not deal in intoxicants, right? To not sell or distribute or to deal in intoxicants rather than consuming them yourself. It's to not be in the business of encouraging other people to use intoxicants. Not using intoxicants is in the list of those bodhisattva precepts. It's just not one of the major 10. It's kind of a minor one that's kind of lower down in the list. So there are 2 really important things to understand about the Pankashila, about these 5 precepts. The first one is these are broad guidelines for living a good life. They're not commandments, right? They're not that same sort of thing. The Buddha presents these guidelines as, first of all, the Buddha's perspective is that he did not invent these guidelines, right? He discovered these guidelines. This is a morality that's sort of hardwired into the universe, right? This is the nature of living as an organism, right? Of being a sattva, of being a being. These aren't laws that the Buddha invented from his perspective. These aren't laws that came down from some deity that's going to be personally offended if you break them, right? The Buddhist perspective is these are basic moral ideas that are just kind of obvious. They're just kind of baked into the way the world works and the kind of the basic moral nature of the universe. He didn't invent them. Thich Nhat Hanh, the well-known Vietnamese Zen teacher who died a little while back, actually refers to the 5 precepts as mindfulness trainings, right? That's his name for them, the 5 mindfulness trainings. And that's very consistent with, if you think about calling these precepts, what is a precept? It's a regulation for training, right? A preceptor is a person who's in charge of training someone else. You may have had a job, right? I know in nursing, my wife had a preceptor when she was just, learning to be a nurse, and then she was the preceptor for other people who were nurses, right? So it's kind of supervising someone's training. That's being a preceptor. So a precept is a guideline for training. So as training guidelines, these are intended to be in service of the greater good of those principles from the Dhammapada, right? Not doing evil, doing good, purifying the mind. That's the big thing, right? The precepts are how we put that into practice, right? Sort of unpacking that and what's the implication of that. So that gives a different kind of perspective about what it means to keep the precepts, what it means to violate the precepts, the fact that we should expect that we are going to violate the precepts, right? We're not perfect. We do the best we can. We learn. We're training ourselves to follow these better over time. Let me. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories along the way here. Let me tell you a story to illustrate what I mean. This is in one of the Pali Suttas. So imagine this. I'm going to make this very colloquial. So 2 monks are traveling down the road. They're heading north to meet the Buddha and the community and to be with the rest of the Sangha for a while. So they're traveling this road, they're going north. And another man that they know is coming south, and they meet at this crossroads. They meet this man, right? And they know him and they greet him. Hello, how are you? And they chat for a minute and they kind of catch up. And then the 2 monks are going to continue north. And this other man is going to turn to the east, and he's traveling that way. So he got to the crossroads and he's going to take this other road and he's going to go east. And the 2 men keep walking. north in the direction that the other man had just come from. And another man is coming, and his face is red, and his brow is knotted. He's got a sword. And he says, "Have you seen this guy? I'm looking for this guy, and he wronged me somehow, and I'm looking for him. When I find him, I'm going to kill him. Have you seen him?" And it's the man that they were just chatting with that they're looking for, who turned east at the crossroads. And so the two monks are like, "We know who he's looking for. What do we do?" And so they tell this man with the sword, this angry man with the sword, "Oh, yes, we saw him. We saw him at the crossroads. He went west. So if you want to find him, go west." Now, the guy didn't go west. He went east, right? But they tell the guy, he went, "Oh, I'm going to go get," and he goes to the crossroads and he turns west and he's chasing after the guy, right? Who's going the opposite way, right? So the two monks keep walking north, and they're going to meet the Buddha in the community. And as they're walking, they're, "Oh, what? That was weird." And they're talking about it. And what did we do? And we kind of lied to that guy, and we told him something that wasn't true. And we're not really supposed to do that. That's one of the precepts. We're supposed to tell the truth. So did we just do something wrong? We should go talk to the Buddha about this, right? So when we get up to where the Sangha is, when we get to the Vihara where the Buddha is staying, we're going to find the Buddha and we'll talk to the Buddha about this. So they go in and they reach the community and they greet the Sangha and they go to see the Buddha. And as the Pali Suttas always say, they circumambulate around him 3 times and they sit off to one side. And then these two monks tell the Buddha this story about this guy. We met this guy and we said hello, and then this other guy came and he had a big sword, and we told the guy went one way and really the guy went the other way. And did we screw up? Was that bad what we did? Did we break the precepts? Are we in trouble? But was that a bad thing to have done? And the Buddha basically tells them, you did the right thing, right? Yes, you said something that wasn't true, but why did you say it? You said it to protect the first man, right? Because if you had told the truth and the second angry man with the sword had known where the guy went, he'd have followed him, he might have killed him, right? So yes, you said something that wasn't true, but you did it for the purpose of, the intent of it was to protect the first man. And actually, by doing that, you protected both of them, right? Because you protected the angry man from the karma that would have accumulated if he had found the first man and hurt him or killed him. Then he would have been in a bad state in terms of his moral actions, right? His karma. So you kind of protected that second man from himself, from being the victim of his own anger and experiencing the karma that would have come from that. So in the service of, don't do evil, do good, purify your mind, sometimes the best way to keep the precepts is to violate a precept, right? In that case, saying something that wasn't true for the sake of protecting not just the first man from the second man, but the second man from himself was the moral thing to do. So that's the kind of calculus that we have to do sometimes. It's actually really similar to in Judaism. There's an Judaism, the law. It's all about the law in Judaism, and in Orthodox Judaism in particular, very, very careful about following the law and all that. Things like, keeping the Sabbath, not driving or doing work on the Sabbath, that sort of thing. But there's a concept in Judaism called a pikuach nefesh, which basically means it's okay to break a law to protect the health of a person, right? So sometimes the best way to keep the law with a big L is to break a law with a little l, and the precepts are like that, right? Sometimes the best way to preserve the bigger concept, the bigger idea of not doing evil, doing good, purifying our minds, is to actually take an action that by the letter of the precepts might seem like it's wrong, but in the greater service of things, it's right. It's kind of the only good action that there is. So that's the first thing to understand, right? The second important thing to understand about it is, since the path of Dharma is about purifying the mind, more important than our actions are the thoughts that underlie the actions. In other words, what's our intention, right? What's the motivation behind the behavior? Because a behavior, the intention behind the behavior is more important than the consequence of the behavior from a Buddhist understanding. Okay, And again, a minute ago, I used the word karma, right? So this is about karma too. Karma means action, literally, right? But what it really is involving is the fruits of our actions, right? What are the implications? What are the kind of the long-term consequences of our actions in our lives? Um, and the more intentional an action is, and that applies to both moral actions and immoral actions, the greater the karmic consequence of it would be. Okay, now I'm going to unpack that in just a second, but let me tell another little story to illustrate what I mean. I was mowing my grass one day, and the mower's running, and I don't remember now why, but I stopped the mower for a minute to do something, and the mower's still running. And as I'm kind of stand back up to start pushing the lawnmower again to mow my yard, and a moth landed right in front of the lawnmower. Now, if I had pushed the lawnmower, I'd have killed that moth, right? I'd have chopped them up inside my lawnmower. So I didn't. I saw the moth. I thought, shouldn't kill that moth. I stopped and I kind of got the moth out of the way, and then I kept mowing my grass. Now, why did that matter? In the course of mowing my grass, I probably killed some other bugs, right? By stepping on them or sucking them up on the lawnmower, there were probably beings that died in the process of me doing this somewhat silly thing that we do in America of mowing the grass in our yards, right? I probably killed things in the process of doing that. What difference did it make that I didn't kill that one particular moth? Well, I knew the moth was there, right? And if I pushed my lawnmower over that moth, I'd have done it on purpose. It would have been intentional, right? As opposed to when I went out to cut my grass, my intent was to cut my grass. It wasn't to kill a bunch of bugs, right? The fact that I maybe killed some bugs in the process of mowing my grass, that was unintentional. Doesn't mean it's totally free from moral consequence, but it wasn't intentional. But choosing to push my mower over that moth that I saw land in front of my lawnmower, that would have been intentional, and that would have been a very different moral act. So to kill intentionally and purposefully, obviously that would have the greatest negative karma, right? Because it was a choice that was made and it was driven by my thoughts and it was a behavior that I chose to do. To kill heedlessly when it could have been avoided by being more careful, that's not as negatively karmically loaded. It's still not good, right? But it's not as strong in terms of its karma. And finally, to kill unintentionally by accident, to be, you know, there's a bug in the house and you're trying to catch it and let it free outside, but in the process of that, you accidentally killed the bug when you were actually trying to keep the bug alive, right? That would have the least negative karma. Still some, but the least. So that's a really important thing to understand about how morality works in Buddhism, that the foundation for morality is our intentions, right? So literally that line about purifying the mind in the Dhammapada, don't do evil, do good, purify the mind. Why does the mind matter so much? Because morality is based on intention, right? Not the consequence of the action. Consequences matter, but in terms of morality, what matters is the intention that the action had. What was the thought that motivated the behavior? So the plan, to the extent that it's worked out, for anyone who wants to take precepts in the spring is that during kind of the fall and winter, there'll be kind of a process leading up to that, a process of discernment, right? I'm going to ask folks to read a book about the precepts. I'm picking one. I just started reading one last night that I found out about that I'm leaning toward, but a short book about the precepts and talking about them and what the precepts are and think some about the implications and so on. I'm going to ask folks to think and do some writing, kind of some journaling about what are the implications of the precepts for your own life, your lifestyle. Are they things that you do that seem to be fundamentally incompatible with them? If somebody's a bartender, that would be a problem, right? Dealing in intoxicants, that would be a problem. So what would be the implications of these for your own life? We're going to have some kind of group and one-on-one kind of conversations about the precepts in terms of, again, a process of discernment, right? Trying to discern, is this the right thing for me to do? Are these vows that I can really take? Is this something that I'm prepared to do? Am I ready to do it? We were talking about that earlier, right? Am I at this point in my life, am I ready to do this? Or maybe it's just something I should wait to do at a later time. So thinking about that kind of discernment. Um, this is a serious decision because this is not something to be done kind of frivolously. It's vows. It's actually referred to as lay ordination, right? You're sort of making a commitment. Primarily, it's a commitment to yourself, right? But it's still a commitment. It's still vow. It's still making promises. Um, and it's entering formally. It's sometimes referred to as a conversion ceremony, taking the precept. You're entering into a commitment to yourself to follow these moral precepts. You're making a commitment to the three jewels, to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to the Sangha in particular, because by taking the precepts, you're formally coming into the Sangha. And there's a mutual commitment that's involved in that. So it's something to think seriously about, to really be discerning about, and have some deep conversations about. And I look forward to having those kinds of conversations for everybody who thinks that they want to pursue this path, so we can talk about it more.